Welcome to this edition of the 14 podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Joining us today, a good buddy of mine, Trey Wallace. He was on with us last week. I think we'll have many more of these to come. He is a writer at Outkick.com. Trey, it has been an interesting week in the SEC. Thanks for joining us today.
I appreciate you having me. It's been a darn sure interesting week in the Southeastern Conference, so lots to talk about.
Yeah, you're not getting hit up for media at all, are you?
Oh, no, nothing's going on in Knoxville to talk about, right?
Well, I don't even think Knoxville was the biggest story of the week. And frankly, the two biggest stories of the week, and this says a lot because right now the football is tremendously compelling in the league, but the two biggest stories right now are coming off the field. Let's start with the biggest one. LSU has dismissed Coach Ed Orgeron after a win against Florida that I don't think anybody expected. People have questioned the timing. Frankly, it was coming anyway. And so you might as well go ahead and announce it during the season. I think that disarms a lot of the criticism. I think that gets you a lot of goodwill both ways and probably is a way to limit some damage control for what a guy like Ed Orgeron could say. He's a little bit of a wild card. But Trey, what is your reaction of the firing of Ed Orgeron and the timing of it?
I think that when we talked about this last week, my thought was, okay, maybe they do this thing after the Ole Miss game where they have a bye week and they have a little bit more time, to set in motion if they were going to put somebody in place to coach the team. But the fact that they came to a resolution where Coach Orgeron is going to be with the team for the rest of the season, I think that's why you saw everything play out the way it did when it comes to him remaining the coach and them announcing it when they did. I've talked with some folks down there. I mean, it's just, look, he's pretty much kind of lost the locker room down there. The coaching staff is kind of been all over the place. You really look at things and how they played out over the last couple of weeks, and that Kentucky loss pretty much sealed it. Like I think it was done anyways. Like he wasn't going to return next season, but the way that they lost to Kentucky and the over 300 yards rushed against that defense, it kind of set it in motion. So I'm not surprised that Ed Orgeron is out. I'm a little surprised on the timing part of it, especially, like you said, coming off that big win against Florida at home where they were underdogs. So now we'll see what this team really feels about Ed Orgeron and the way that they come out and play this weekend against the Rebels, Chris.
Okay, anytime you have a coaching firing, a hiring is coming. Some names are starting to pop up. Mel Tucker at Michigan State, potentially one. He was at Colorado for a short time, so if he were to take the job, it would be 3 in a span of 4 years, which is not a long time to be at any place, not what you would probably expect and hope, but sometimes that just happens. How do you handicap, if we can even do that, who LSU's next coach may be?
I mean that's tough. The Mel Tucker thing. I get it. I don't think he has done enough yet to take on a program like LSU. I think when the names that pop in my head immediately are James Franklin, potentially Mario Cristobal. You look at Lane Kiffin. Kiffin's name's going to be brought up in this. Either by him, in design by Jimmy Sexton, or he has legitimate interest. And then, there's always going to be the name Billy Napier that's thrown out there because he worked under Saban, because he's been at Louisiana Lafayette and had success right now. But I think Scott Woodard and what you've seen out of him in the past and the way that he got the Jimbo Fisher deal done at Texas A&M, he's going to swing for the fences. And I think LSU is a top 5 job in the country with all the resources, the recruiting, everything that they put into the athletic facilities down there. I don't think it's going to be a hard sell. I just think LSU has to find the right fit. And that's going to be my biggest concern over the next 2 months is which direction do they go? Is that person going to be the right fit for the Southeastern Conference and for what they're trying to do in Baton Rouge?
What are you hearing on James Franklin? Both of us knew him a little bit from our time in Nashville. I don't think either of us would be shocked if he left Penn State for LSU. I know Pennsylvania is his hometown, but I think he got a taste of the flavor in the SEC, and I think he loved what he saw while he was at Vanderbilt. What do you make of his potential candidacy? And if so, you've also got Southern Cal in play, and how would that affect things?
I keep hearing James Franklin's name mentioned more with Southern Cal over the last 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever, since they made that change from Clay Helton, more so than what could happen in Baton Rouge. Like personally, Chris, we covered James Franklin. I could see him at Southern Cal. I don't know if I could see him in Baton Rouge. I don't know. It's an interesting dynamic there that could play out. But James Franklin is a hot name, and James Franklin did flirt around with Tennessee last year. Ended up, I think it was more so, for more money from Penn State. But overall, he was flirting, so he was looking around. I just feel personally, Chris, that James Franklin would fit better at Southern Cal than he would at LSU. But I say that to say this. We know James Franklin can win in the Southeastern Conference, because if you can win at Vanderbilt, you can win anywhere. So it would not surprise me one bit that his name is brought up a lot for that LSU job, and if he's one of the potential candidates for it.
Well, look, I get what you're saying about Southern Cal. I do think that's one of the jobs that I've always heard that he really coveted. But, okay, the last 3 coaches who've been hired at LSU have won national titles. And you know James Franklin as well as I do. One thing James Franklin loves to do above and beyond anything, and that's win.
No, I don't agree. I'm sorry, I don't disagree. He's a guy that look, he wants the continued success that he's had in his last previous stops, which was Vanderbilt and Penn State. I think you are able to go to LSU and win in your first year compared to going to Southern Cal and it taking 3 to 4 years to build up that program. Because anybody that takes that LSU job, if they're good enough, they're going to be able to go in there. They're going to be able to win immediately just because of the recruiting in the state and the brand that sells itself. So I don't disagree with you. I think James Franklin is about those wins. Do you try to go rebuild a program kind of like what he did with Vanderbilt and Penn State, or do you walk into a situation where you know you're going to win?
Well, one thing about losing Ed Orgeron from the SEC, certainly it gets a little bit less interesting in terms of press conferences and God knows what else, right?
Yeah. I mean, we all know what old Franklin brings to the media avenue, the way he can promote a program. I've always said this, Chris, and I've said this to you numerous times. James Franklin reminds me of Bruce Pearl. James Franklin is the Bruce Pearl of college football. That's what he reminds me of. That's what he can do for a program. And you won't ever have to worry about, him missing an appearance or him being able to prop up the school that he's at. So, no, I think, I would just love to see, for some reason, I would really like to see him back in the Southeastern Conference and see if he can build upon what he did at Vanderbilt and get another crack at this thing because, again, having success up there in Nashville and then, being able to come back down to the SEC in Baton Rouge with a bigger school, there's no doubt that I think James Franklin could win a national championship.
Could you see James Franklin asking random strangers at gas stations about their workout habits?
No, not at all. That's no,
not at all. No,
I don't think old James is like that. I think we know him well enough that he's not going to toe that line. But Ed Orgeron sure will.
Yeah, there was some humor in the last week for sure, and God knows what's going to come out between now and the coming months. But let's shift to another interesting off the field thing that happened. Of course, everybody was talking about Knoxville on Saturday night. You almost got hit by a hot dog being on the field. Thank God the mustard didn't get you too. But what was it just like to be in the middle of that atmosphere, not just the circus at the end, but just the game the entire night?
Let me tell you something. I went down into the stands during pregame because I wanted to experience it. when we're in the press box, we don't get to experience it. It's usually closed, indoors, and we can't really hear everything and the crowd and just the environment. I went down into the stands and kind of watched the pregame a little bit. And I tell you, man, Chris, it was one of the most exciting times at Tennessee that they've had since that Oklahoma game in 2015. And also, I'll say this. It was one of the best environments that I've been a part of pregame and during the game. That I think it's been years since I've been a part of something like that. I think Tennessee did a really good job of promoting the university, trying to get their football program out there in a sense and let folks know what Josh Heupel is doing. I thought overall that's what college football was all about. I'm not talking about the final 5 minutes of the game, but I'm talking about overall the spectacle of it, Chris. It was something I'll never forget.
Trey, why didn't they just clear the stands at that point? I mean, I would think as much stuff as was getting thrown on the field, you saw the band coming out. Lane Kiffin still got hit with some stuff after the game, so you still had some folks in that building that were willing to throw things. Why didn't UT just evacuate the crowd? I mean, I guess that would have taken a while, but seems to me, and I don't know what protocol is for those type of things, but to me, I was watching, I was thinking, get everybody out of there and play the game without fans, because at that point, it just seemed like it was a big safety risk.
And that would have been a lot. That would have been much. Now, the police and security did go into the student section and started moving them out. And it was so surreal, man. Like when I saw the cheerleaders, ducking for cover and using their little cheer signs as blockades, to not get hit with anything. And then I'm looking at the Pride of the Southland marching band, exit out of the stadium pretty quickly, try to get underneath kneeling. Like it was just weird. It was very surreal in the moment. I was sitting there on the field and I'm like, okay, this is actually happening. This is the craziest thing I've ever seen when it comes to a college football game. And I mean that just everything in general. I mean, we've seen stuff be thrown on playing surfaces in the past, but like everything in general, like Kiffin, kind of signaling to the student section while the delay's going on. And you got security surrounding the south end zone area and police going up in the stands making arrests. And again, like the marching band, kind of jogging out of the stadium and hot dogs coming down and beer cans. It was, it was very awkward. It wasn't scary. Like it wasn't anything like that. Like it wasn't scary. It was just a rowdy crowd, and you had maybe 100 students, whatnot, 100 people, a little bit more, get involved in this thing, and it kind of took it to the next level. But I thought the conference, I thought Tennessee, I thought Ole Miss all did a good job of making sure that game was going to be finished.
Trey, one thing about that game that just popped off the page was Matt Corral. Just the fearless running, maybe to a point where he's put himself out for this week, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But I just thought the way he led that offense with some guys on that side of the ball out, that to me was a Heisman-like performance. I don't know if he'll end up winning it, but to me right now I have a hard time naming a better player in the country than Matt Corral.
Chris, 195 yards on the ground.
And let me interject, that Tennessee defense is not a bad one. They've defended the rush really well, and I know doing that from the quarterback position is a little different, but just for some context, Tennessee's played some pretty solid defense, which to me that made that more impressive.
Well, Tennessee also held Ole Miss to one touchdown in the second half. A lot of people seem to forget that. In the second half, Tennessee bent, but they didn't break. And I give that a lot of credit to Tennessee's defense, which is shorthanded at some positions. Matt Corral is just a really good quarterback, and his ability to see the field, his ability to get outside the pocket, his ability to draw teams in, and then him just take off for 20 yards down the field, it shouldn't go unnoticed. I think he should be leading the Heisman race right now. His ability to find his guys down the field open, his ability to make those checks at the line of scrimmage and see something, see a blitz coming, get out of it. I'm 30. Well, I think he had 30 carries for 195. It's just he's a different type of quarterback, and it's been very interesting to watch him develop under Lane Kiffin. And I just see him as somebody that's very special, that can lead this Ole Miss team to I don't know, 8 wins, 9 wins this year. And looking at it overall, he should definitely be in New York City if he keeps up this type of play, Chris. And we're going to see. LSU this weekend, which I think he can, run for 200 yards if he wanted to against LSU. But it's all about keeping that up. And I promise you this. If Lane Kiffin knows that Matt Corral's in the Heisman race, he's going to do whatever it takes to make sure that he gets the yards through the air and on the ground that he needs to make his case for New York City.
Well, I think the big question is, does he play this weekend against LSU? And God help us trying to figure out how that game's going to go even with Matt Corral. Without Matt Corral, I mean, really who knows at that point. But if Corral doesn't play, it looks like it's Luke Altmaier, who's 0-4 passing this year and has run for 14 yards. I'm just really keeping an eye on that situation because according to Lane Kiffin and what he said this week, it doesn't sound like Matt Corral is going to play.
I don't know if that's messing around a little bit with Ed but he did twist his ankle. He took a hit. And if Corral can't go, Ole Miss is going to figure that thing out at the quarterback position. But look, when you run that many times for that many yards and you get hit as many times as he did against Tennessee, because Tennessee was bringing pressure and Tennessee was finishing plays, even though he might have gained 15 to 20 yards, Tennessee let him know, that they were there. It would stink if, and that's the word I'm going to use, stink. It would stink if Matt Corral was not available for LSU. But I got this feeling that he's going to trot out there on Saturday, and he might have to sling it around a little bit more than usual and not be running the ball. But I just got this gut feeling that he's not going to miss this Ole Miss game, this LSU game this weekend, especially when they're honoring former quarterback Eli Manning, retiring his number.
Well, throwing the ball on LSU right now, not exactly a huge challenge, especially given some of the injuries that defense has.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, this LSU defense is just not good. Their defensive line struggles. Linebacking spot has not been able to get to the quarterback as much as possible. Perfect example, you look at this past weekend, too. I mean, okay, LSU won that football game against Florida, but look what Anthony Richardson did against that defense. So if Ole Miss is able to expose them again and expose them at corner as well, it's going to be a long day for Ed Orgeron and what they've done. I know that they've gone through a lot of injuries this year, but LSU is the type of team where your second string player should be just up on the level as your first string player. And I would say the same thing for Georgia. I'd say the same thing for Alabama. But you haven't seen that this season. And, the injuries have piled up, but that shouldn't be an excuse for the play that they've had on the field at times when they could have prevented it.
I don't think anybody on either side saw LSU beating Florida last week. Does Dan Mullen need to start worrying? I mean, they've got Georgia on Saturday. That could be ugly. Florida, frankly, is underachieved a little bit. The Kentucky game was there for the taking. They couldn't take it. The Alabama performance a few weeks ago seems like forever ago. What do you make of that situation in Gainesville right now?
Chris, I think that if they don't make the move to Anthony Richardson, I think that you're looking at a situation where, first off, everybody's agitated with Todd Grantham on that defense, and I don't blame them. Dan Mullen's going to have to make a move in the offseason on the defensive side of the football. But right now, fans are frustrated because they think Anthony Richardson is the answer. and he could be. But it's also the fact that he hasn't got a lot of playing time in the even last week. He didn't get a lot of playing time, which I think it was 6 snaps or whatever like that. And I know he was dealing with a hamstring in the weeks before that. But when you've got a kid that can go out there and sling that football like he can and get down the field and make players miss and lead the offense, you've got to go with the younger guy. Like, I get being committed to Emory Jones because of everything that he's done for the program and how long he's been here and everything that is involved in that quarterback situation and how they developed in the offseason. But when you know the time is right, that you've got to switch things up, you got to make that decision. And you got to make it with, emphatically. Don't just say, okay, we're just throwing this guy out there because, he had a good second half. Like, say, okay, we're looking towards the future here. Because right now, Florida fans are agitated. And agitated is me being nice on your podcast. I could say a lot worse than that. This is something where Florida fans were out of the SEC East running, by what? By week 5 of the season. And when you get in those situations, where your goal next week is, yes, to win the game against Georgia, but it's really just to ruin their season. Like, if that's your goal by week 8, then things at Florida have gone south pretty quick during the season. So, folks aren't happy with Dan Mullen and his staff right now. And, Chris, I don't know if I can really blame them.
What did that win in Fayetteville this weekend mean for Auburn?
I think it just got them back on track. I think that's the big thing. Arkansas has now lost 3 straight, but I think them going up there and doing it the way they did it as well. Bo Nix coming out and leading on a big drive in the second half, or him hitting the deep ball, him getting outside the pocket and playing well. It's all about building up that momentum. And look, Auburn needed a win like that. Arkansas needed just as much as Auburn did. But you go up there and you go on the road, you're able to, coming off a loss to Georgia as well, where you kind of humbled a little bit in a sense. Like, I know they lost to Penn State earlier in the year, but that Georgia loss was pretty rough. You go up there and you're able to do what you do on offense, and your defense plays pretty darn well to hold an Arkansas team to those certain amount of points. I think that it builds confidence in them. I still think they have a long way to go, but you look at this Auburn team, and for them to go up there and hand Arkansas their 3rd straight loss, it's got to be a definite confidence booster, Chris.
Anything else worth talking about? I mean, it seems like there's just so much going on. Obviously, you've on a limited schedule right now, but any other SEC storylines you wanted to comment on or watch as we wrap this up today?
I'm just kind of looking at, what happens with Tennessee this week. They are injured big time at the quarterback position. They have got to figure out how they're going to put together this offensive line with potentially without Cade Mays and Cooper Mays. Don't have a running back. I want to see how Tennessee bounces back at Alabama. That to me is going to be interesting. Can they just go down there and play a tough game? I don't think it's going to be too terribly close, but I'm interested to see what Joe Milton does if Hendon Hooker can't go. And then also kind of keeping an eye on, what's going to happen with South Carolina, as we got word this weekend. Today, that Luke Doughty is now out for the season. He's going to have surgery on that foot. So South Carolina is going to have to roll with Zeb Nolan for the rest of the year. And they play an A&M team this weekend, that kind of feels like they're on a roll right now. Popping off 2 nice wins, and you're kind of rolling right now. The Aggies are, after beating Alabama. So that's kind of the storylines I'm looking for. Besides that LSU Ole Miss game, I want to see how Tennessee responds on the road. And then I'd like to see if the Aggies can take care of business against the South Carolina team that's kind of depleted. I mean, I guess the last small thing would be, Chris, and for the team that you cover a good amount of time, can Vanderbilt take any kind of momentum that they got out of that game last weekend, even though they lost? And can they turn that into something good against Mississippi State on Saturday? Because Mississippi State got trounced against Alabama. I thought Vanderbilt should have won that football game on Saturday. I'm very interested to see how Clark Lee rallies up his team this week, and if they could beat Mississippi State, wow, that'd be a nice first SEC win of the season.
Well, let me add one more thing. I think a question I have as much as any is where is State's season headed? Because I don't have any grasp on that team. Most of the games have been really close. In fact, what is it? All but one of them have been 4 points or less coming into the Alabama game. My math about that may be wrong, but I'm looking at it and it's not. And then, Alabama coming off a loss. I mean, that wasn't totally unforeseen, although it did happen in Starkville. But, yeah, I look at that schedule. I think that State's game 2 weeks from now against Kentucky, and that is in Starkville, is super interesting. I think the game against Arkansas after that is interesting, the same one with Auburn. And, of course, Mississippi State and Ole Miss at the end of the year is one of the better rivalries in the country, even if it's not recognized at a national level like some of the other ones in this league are. To me, I just every week have trouble getting a handle on what to expect from State because we've seen State beat some good teams and lose to some mediocre ones.
Yeah, this Mississippi State team's so awkward to me, Chris. It's back and forth. It's 1 week they play well, like they played well in College Station. The next week they come back and, you're getting trounced by Alabama, not looking good in the process. I think they had -1 rushing yards against Alabama. And look, I know it's Alabama, but, we've seen this team give up yards, like they did to A&M. So, Mike Leach kind of flies underneath the radar down there in Starkville.
That's hard to believe in it. Mike Leach flying under the radar anywhere.
Well, it is, and it's because it's Mississippi State, and that's not a shot at Mississippi State. It's just because they're not having the success like you think they would after beating A&M. That's a nice little win to catapult things, and then they come out and they look dead against Alabama. So I'm interested in how the rest of the season turns out for them because they better turn things around down there. Or honestly, I don't know if Mike Leach survives another 2 years in Starkville.
Trey, that was a lot of great stuff today. Tell folks where they can follow your work, please.
Absolutely. You can follow me at Trey Wallace _ on Twitter. Follow my coverage every single day of the SEC on Outkick.com. Lots of different podcasts and stuff coming out soon. Look forward to that. And you can find me every week here with Chris Lee.
Be good, my friend.
Thank you, my brother.
All right, that's Trey Wallace of Outkick. I'm Chris Lee, host of the 14 podcast. Thanks for listening. We'll have another one coming up. That should drop either Thursday or Friday.